Well, hello everyone. Welcome to Westside. Thanks so much for being here with us on the first Sunday of the year. Really glad that you began your year with us. My guest today is Mindy Caliguire, and I'm so glad that you're here, Mindy. Thanks so much for making the trip to Springfield and choosing to be with us.
Glad to.
I just want to dive right into our conversation. I'd like for you to tell us about yourself and why you have a passion for helping people become more intentional about their inner lives.
Yeah. So about myself, my husband and I have been married for 34 years, I think. So we were college sweethearts. And we have 3 grown sons, and we now live in the Denver area, Boulder actually, which is just fabulous. God's country, I think they say.
Sounds gorgeous.
It is unbelievable. But in terms of why this has been an enduring passion for my own life and my life's work, has been out of my own story. So when I was, in my late 20s, I ended up just like many people do, working really, really hard at a project I was very passionate about. We were starting a church ministry, and I just only knew how to work really hard and do things that needed to be done. And when you count up all the things that need to be done and keep doing that harder and harder all the time in a very demanding environment, sounds like modern life, if you don't attend to that inner life, which I didn't, I ended up with some pretty severe neurological symptoms that effectively sidelined me from my life for a season.
Wow.
And it was scary. And especially scary when I didn't know if they would get better. It's like one thing if you can endure some level of suffering if you think it's going to end. But when the doctors were saying, we don't know if this is ever going to change, it really demanded my attention. And I think God very mercifully brought me through that season to realize the importance of my inner life, to realize the importance of my soul, which I didn't really think about that before. I mean, I was a Christian, I was a follower of Jesus, but I didn't really think about my life with God as something that required some nurture or intentionality beyond my beliefs. So that's why it has been a passion, because as I got better, I had more and more opportunities to create resources or communication opportunities, whatever, to try to help people, others. Because if I find everywhere I go, and I've been a lot of places now these many years, most people, even deeply devoted followers of Jesus, really, like me, don't really have this imagination about their inner life. And so we don't live accordingly, but it wouldn't take much to change that.
Well, that's a hopeful last comment in that thread. The term soul care, which connects directly to how you've named and shared your ministry and your work with other people, it sounds really monastic in nature. And I think some of us, hear it and we immediately think, that's not me, I've got things to do. You've already kind of spoken to that with your own story, but we're tempted to think maybe only certain personality types actually go there. Maybe reflective people, artistic people, people with a more melancholy vibe will care about that. So are there indicators that alert us that our souls are needing attention? Maybe they're not as severe or as obvious as some of the ones you mentioned in your own story. How would you respond?
Yeah, I think the idea of discovering symptoms of how your soul is doing is one of the most helpful ways to have it sort of surface on our dashboard of our life, so to speak, right? Like we start to notice symptoms that are indicators. And I'll get to that in a sec, but I also want to say that's what also helps people who might not as naturally be inclined to take quiet walks in the woods by themselves, right? Or rest for an hour of solitude and things like that, that in my story, I would have only done if I had like absolutely nothing better to do, and that never happened. So I can understand that, and I often talk about that my desire with the ministry of soul care is to help the people that are like the candlelighters, which are the ones that are more contemplative, whatever, and the jet fuel drinkers, who are the people probably like you, probably
These
like...
are great terms. I love your terms.
Well, the candle lighters and the jet fuel drinkers, like, they don't speak the same language. And they don't really understand each other. The jet fuel drinkers are like leaping tall buildings in a single bound. They're like, you know, they do all those great things. But really, the life that I believe God invites us into is a life of integration of these two things. And so back to your question about symptoms, when we begin to notice and pay attention to symptoms of the soul, I think it gives maybe the more jet fuel drinker type people cause to think, oh wait, maybe it shouldn't be this way. Maybe there's a deeper thing going on. So some examples that I think of with soul, I call it soul neglect, because it's benign neglect. Nobody means to, you know, here it is the beginning of a new year. Nobody's put it on their New Year's resolutions to trash the well-being of their soul this year, but it can happen. We kind of get running and gunning, we get busy, and then we forget about God, and then we forget that we forgot. And when that happens, even if we have a head full of really good truths about God, those utterly predictable symptoms of soul neglect, and some of them are, you know, we feel, for me, I can feel a lot of drivenness, like I gotta go make something happen, I gotta go do that. I feel the weight on my shoulders in a way that I don't think God intends, so I can feel that drivenness. Some people, many people report feeling a lot of anger, and then anger as it, you know, has derivative or worsening symptoms. It devolves into bitterness, disdain, contempt. Like those things are just versions of anger gone mad. And another one would be we lose energy. We just have a loss of energy. We have some apathy. We don't really care about stuff anymore, and we don't really know why. The general term of languishing, right? When we just start a sense of malaise, like something isn't right, we can't put our finger on what it is. Things that don't go away with a good night's sleep, and things like that, that just, it's like something's not right with my soul. I might be more judgy, I get more fearful, I wake up with panic in the morning. Like a lot of things that frankly our whole world has experienced a lot more of the last few years, because I think there has been a less sort of resilience with all the demands that we've been encountering with public health and politics, and so many different things have just surfaced a lot of soul neglect.
Well, I think a lot of us are seeing our reflection in some of the things that you're describing and the words that you're using. It seems to me like a couple of things that are just so widespread and so chronic in so many people would be worrying. People are just eaten up with worry, and there's a lot of complaining. And obviously social media invites us to be complainers. And we sometimes justify those things by saying, well, I just care a lot, or I can tell when things aren't being done right, and I'm just trying to make the world better. Is there really something else going on there?
Well, I think you must already know the answer to that.
Is that a setup or what?
That was a total setup, but I'll take it. Yeah, I have a friend whose family of origin, and they themselves often talk about the way they frame a worry or a complaint is, I'm just concerned. I'm just concerned that blah, 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 blah. And it makes it sound like, how can you argue with somebody that's concerned about you? But the subtle underbelly of things like that, we become pretty adept at rationalizing our own unhealthy thought patterns, and then we do that interpersonally as well with saying, well, I just love you so much, I'm worried that whatever. I mean, Scripture could not be more clear about the dangers of letting our thought life run rampant with negativity and complaining and arguing and things that Jesus couldn't be more clear about not worrying. And I think he says those things not to shake a finger of shame towards us, but knowing how the human soul is designed to flourish. And we do not flourish when that is what's constantly spinning in our heads. And we feel very justified and entitled to it. But it is one of the most important things to begin arresting those thought patterns when possible and having a new thought, allowing God to breathe some new ideas into our minds and into our heads, because the negativity that swirls interpersonally and then just even in our own heart and soul, when we cave into, rampant worries, it just doesn't end well. It doesn't end well. And some of that drivenness that, I said is one of my symptoms of soul neglect, I think probably at the core is rooted in that worry and rooted in that concern that keeps me driving harder than what the Lord's invited me into.
So is there any projection going on when we begin to indulge those feelings and those words? We think something's wrong with someone else. We know something's wrong with the world.
Yeah.
But is it really that something's wrong with us?
Well, I'm not a psychologist and a psychotherapist, so I can't probably answer as professionally as maybe some of the group here could. But I know a fun little story from my husband and I a couple years ago. He decided one year for Lent, which is a time of the church calendar where some people give up a thing, right? Some people give up sweets or chocolate or caffeine or something like that, or television or social media, any of these things. But he decided, and he didn't tell me ahead of time, but I found out some time into Lent that he had decided to give up complaining for Lent.
Oh, wow, that's a sacrifice.
I mean, right? Who does that? I thought it was the funniest thing. And I didn't really, I didn't really notice. He reported that it made a big difference, right? I know, who does that? It's hilarious.
Sounds like a real marriage.
Well, the funny thing is, we're walking out of church on Easter Sunday at the end of Lent, and somebody he felt snubbed him in the foyer or whatever. I don't even remember the circumstances. And whether that happened or not, he just, on the way to the car, started complaining to me about it. And I was like, wait, what? And he's like, I'm done. I don't have to do this anymore. We go back to that all the time. And so I don't know if projection is the right word or what it is, but the freedom and happiness that came over him and continues to, because now he's obviously he's become good at paying attention to when he starts complaining. And I think that's something I can do more of. That's something probably all of us can do more of, and choose not to go there.
Well, if that was the only takeaway that we got from today, it would absolutely transform our homes, our workplaces, our culture. That's huge. You mentioned your husband.
Yeah.
That makes me want to ask just about men. Not all men are in denial about our feelings. I think I felt something once. I'm pretty sure I did. But we dudes are sometimes reluctant to pick up on some of these habits, or even to talk about this topic. It might seem a little feminine to some men. Devotions, quiet time, that's not a typical dude conversation. So can you tell us, when you've seen men kind of come alive in this way, what has helped that happen?
Yeah. And just to first agree with you, sometimes this gets cast very much or only in the realms that feel uncomfortable for men. It's like we're talking about intimacy with God, we're talking about nurturing soul health. It just can feel like the pink zone. And I don't think it should be relegated to that. But what I think can be most helpful sometimes is when men are introduced to more awakening their imagination to the unseen world. That, to me, is the most important sort of logic piece that needs to fall into place for us to become willing to arrange our lives around the well-being of our soul.
Because that's what spirituality is.
Totally.
It is the unseen world.
It is the unseen world, which I believe is the thing that supersedes, permeates, and undergirds everything that we can touch and taste and talk to. That invisible realm, the kingdom of God, some would say, that realm is the most important definition of reality, where reality is really happening. And to engage with that requires a certain slowing, requires a certain quieting of our hearts and minds so that we can become more attuned to what God is doing and how we can be participating with God in that. And that may sound even still kind of mystical and woozy, but it really does. If you think about men historically, so many of the great authors, the writers, the people who have influenced us for centuries were men who could speak out of the authenticity of this deep inner life that was alive to the spiritual realm and to God. And so we talk all the time about having a relationship with God. Well, what does that actually mean? How are we connecting in real time with God, not just with ideas about God, but connecting with God? Those are some things that I've found helpful. And fundamentally, when you go spend time in some of these practices and you see the results in your life, when you see that, I think it was John Ortberg used to say that spiritual practices like are self-validating. When you choose to spend time in these ways, nobody has to try to convince you that they're a good idea. It's self-validating.
But every new thing is uncomfortable when we first start it.
Always. Always.
Yeah, so we shouldn't be dismissive of it
Nope.
for that reason. That kind of leads me to the next thing I wanted to speak about and ask you about. This term spiritual disciplines. It sounds heavy, sounds demanding.
Yeah.
If Jesus' yoke is light, which he promised that it is, how should that change the way we think about spiritual disciplines?
I think it can. And I think like learning to do things that might be unfamiliar at first, we have to recognize there's a learning curve in that. There's a moving past what might initially feel uncomfortable to get to what could this be? But I don't think that Jesus lays a yoke on us that is only about the disciplines themselves. The yoke we bear is the challenges of our life, the calling that he's brought us into, the kinds of opportunities, ministry or business or family or whatever it is, the thing of our life that we're invited into, I think of as the yoke that we are invited to carry. And the way that we carry that yoke through connection with God, through those disciplines or practices, whatever word you want to put around it, creating rhythms and routines to live out of this connection with God, with the unseen world. When we build those into our way of life, that's what allows the actual yoke of our true responsibilities to not feel so heavy.
So we shouldn't see this invitation as a yoke. It's actually what's lifting the burden, making it lighter.
That's how I see it. Maybe others might see it otherwise.
And maybe this is where deception comes in, because
Yeah.
if we begin to think of this as a burden or an undesirable thing, we're actually pulling back from the very thing that makes life more livable, more joy-filled. So if I'm a person who has difficulty being still, and I'm sure I'm speaking for some people who are with us today, am I doomed to never have a devotional life, to never experience this kind of deep, crucial breathing that we're talking about?
Absolutely not. First of all, if you're a type of person that has trouble being or staying still, welcome to modern life. Like everything in our whole world right now is aimed at distraction, intervention, not the good kind, like just interruption all the time. And it takes a bit of a rebellion against some of that in certain parts of our life to begin to practice stillness, to practice the ability to detach from that stuff.
So practice makes me think that just as the first time we practice anything, we're not going to be completely adept. I like the word because it allows for imperfection.
Yeah, none of anything I'm talking about with soul care is about perfection. All of it is a journey, all of it is learning, all of it is practice. But yeah, we just have to learn. Like our brains, our minds don't know how to be still. You know, we most of us know that Bible verse, to be still and know that I am God. How do I do that? Well, you're not going to go from never being still to being still for 15 minutes without some bumps and bruises along that way, but you absolutely can. Our brains and our bodies have learned how to be distracted and stressed. We can also unlearn that stuff and relearn a better way of being human.
Well, the notifications on our phone, it's like a microcosm of our world. Our entire world is trying to pull us away, always demanding our attention or trying to lure us into giving our attention to it. Do you have any tips for us?
Yeah.
On how to make some of those things work for us and stop working against the health of our inner world?
Yeah. I'm journeying on this myself. So this is like, cell phones weren't a thing when I first came into the ideas of soul care.
So have you gone back to a rotary phone?
I have,
Okay.
I have, yeah. Oh my goodness. Do you remember the brick cell phones when they first came out?
Yes.
Oh man.
You didn't want to carry that around.
No. But definitely didn't give you notifications. These are new challenges for us. It's a new day, and even, I think, you know, I'm sure many of you know that the tech companies themselves are starting to rethink the unintended consequences of these interruptions, these constant barrage of interruptions into our brains. So for me, like, very simply, a couple things. I have turned off all notifications from social media. For a while, I just deleted Instagram and Facebook, and I've now put them back on my phone. But all the notifications are off.
So you don't allow your phone to say,
Nope, I don't.
Someone liked your post.
No. I don't allow notifications coming into my cell phone about email. I don't, like, I can see a visual thing, but there's no notifications. Those push notifications, they are like death to your attention.
They really are.
And so now my new iOS, whatever that was, has focus time settings, and I've been using those, and I love it. I love it. So that's one way that I'm starting to use the technology advances as they are realizing that they need to help us level up, because the harm that has happened is significant. So those are a couple of the things. But there are times in the morning in particular where I need to turn off all the devices or leave them somewhere else. I try not to let my phone be the first thing I interact with in the morning. And that, for many years, I did unthinking, didn't even think about it. It was my alarm clock, it was this, that, and the other, and now I've set it aside, and I usually don't pick it up for an hour or so. Not every day, though.
Well, we would all do well just to be more intentional about that. Well, we have a few minutes left together, Mindy, and I've been throwing questions your direction. I think I'd just like to give you an opportunity to talk to us about this, this thing of paying attention to our inner world, realizing how foundational it is to our lives. I just want to allow you to speak to us.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. One of the things that comes first to mind is a phrase that I've worked with for many years, and it's this: that whether you like it or not, whether you know it or not, your soul's well-being is driving everything that matters to you. And I'll say that again, because I really think it's hard for us to grasp this. Your soul's well-being, for good or for ill, its well-being, healthy or not, is actually driving everything that matters to you. And so often we sort of, you think about like the circumstances that might sit at the periphery of your life that you're aware of. How's my relationships? How's my work doing? How's this? How's that? And when we see things starting to not go well, we still push further toward that edge. We push further toward that topic or that issue. And that might still be good. There might be work that needs to happen there, but sometimes many of us do that, never getting back to the center. The thing that's actually driving everything is your soul your life, your soul's well-being.
So that's the operating system, and everything else is like an app. I'm trying to think of a technological metaphor for this.
Perfect example. You detach from your electricity, none of those apps work. They can't. We don't have a construct for like good electricity or bad electricity, but it's a binary with electricity. But if you detach from God as our source, everything starts to malfunction. And the good news in that is that Jesus' invitations to us are so often just return, breathe, return to me, come to me, get away with me, and you'll recover your life, is what he says in a different paraphrase.
A very big promise. That's a lot to promise.
Yeah, but I'm here to say, he'll stand by it. He will stand by the invitation to recover your life. So that's, and then if anybody wants some like simple handles of like, what could I do? It's the beginning of a new year.
That'd be great.
What's some simple things? And I just have this really simple, I don't know if it's called a rubric or whatever it is, but easy to remember. 3 really important things. You need a page, a person, and a plan. What do I mean by that? A page, an invitation to reflection, right? To self-reflection. What's really going on in my soul today? What are my symptoms today? What is going on in my life, and how am I showing up in my relationships? What are some questions you could ask yourself in the pages of a journal, maybe, that's just a non-judgmental, non-threatening, very private way to go, here's what it feels like to be me today. Here's what's going on in my life. If you can't quite get to the feelings, here's what I'm worried about. Here's what I'm complaining about. Here's what I'm excited about. All those things can go on a page, and there's growing amounts of neuroscience that's validating why it's so important for us to physically write that kind of stuff down, to slow our brain to this pace of our ability to write and just be present to it. So a page is really important. A person is another one. Most of us struggle to find a relationship where we can be perfectly honest without fear of judgment, abandonment, rejection, betrayal, all those things that we fear interpersonally. We are designed by God to need these safe places, and it might not be work, might not be home. Could be a therapist, could be a spiritual director, could be just a friendship where somebody is very for you and for your journey, your journeying, your becoming.
Does that person always have to be ahead of us on the journey?
There are advantages to that at times, but I don't think that's essential. I think do they have the capacity to hold space with you in this reality of the unseen world? Mm-hmm. Do they care about who you are, who you're becoming, and can they just hold space for that? Can they hear your journey and it's especially in a friendship like that, it's mutual. You bring that to them as well. But nobody's like in there trying to fix each other or make something happen. It's about a way of relating, a spiritual friendship.
Conversation,
openness, unagendaed, but with an eye to how am I responding to God in my life? And how are you? What is God doing in your life? And how
you're not
are you
asking
responding?
this person to analyze you. You're asking them to converse with you as you explore it.
Nope. Yeah, so spiritual friendship is one. And then, so a page, we talked about that, reflection, person, connection. And the third is a plan. And that's sort of the way to tuck almost any other topics in. But really, we're designed for flourishing on so many levels that I believe God cares deeply about, but sometimes we dissociate from spiritual development. And they would include things like our physical bodies. How are we getting enough sleep? Is our nutrition, like if our brains are not functioning well because of food or exercise or a lack of sleep, then no amount of solitude is going to help. We've got to treat ourselves holistically. And this is back to this integration idea. So what is your plan? Most people have probably already been thinking about what do I want this new year to be like? But to name a few things, and there's a study on human flourishing that the Harvard Flourishing Project has done, and there's some really interesting drivers of flourishing that include the spiritual life, our relational life, our health, which is mental health and physical health. But two other ones that are interesting. One is vocation. How are we doing aligned to vocation, our work, our calling? And then the last is financial. And financial isn't so much like when you have more and more and more. It's financial in the sense of contentment. And do I have enough? Do I feel, is there a sense of enough in my life? And if you used even just those 5 things to say, well, what's a framework for a plan? So a page, a person, and a plan, those are some things I have been working with leaders around for the past year.
Well, that's good stuff, and it's also the kind of thing that we can explore further. Thanks so much for coming and talking about this with us. It's been really helpful, really valuable. I want everyone to know that next week we start our series, Running on Empty, and I'm looking forward to teaching, and I hope you'll be here with us. And you know that there are people in your world who would benefit from a series by that title, exploring these themes. So be here next week. We'll see you then.